This is chicken soup for the golden soul. Risky business. What I've dared, I've willed, and what I've willed, I'll do. That's Herman Melville. A woman who tells her age will tell anything, according to Oscar Wilde, so I have no intention of saying how old I am. But I must admit, I'm no longer in the first flush of youth. In fact, name almost any World War II song and I can probably sing it all the way through. That gives you some idea of why I felt so foolish when I bought the motor scooter. Even as I wrote out the check, I couldn't believe I was actually making such a reckless purchase. True, I had thought for years what fun it would be to have a motor scooter. Whatever for, hooted family and friends. To explore little back roads, I told them. You can do that in the car, they said. Yes, but on a scooter I'll be able to pause and look at a wildflower or listen to the gossipy voice of a stream. You'll get yourself killed, family and friends said. That's exactly why I'd never made a serious move toward getting a scooter. I knew as well as anyone that cars come swinging around curves, and there you are, tossed in the air like a matador on the horns of a bull. So why then, when a friend suggested we stop at a showroom, did I find myself purchasing one of the dangerous contraptions? Granted, the little scooter was as neat and trim as a folded paper airplane, and it came in my favorite shade of blue. It was also quiet and easy to ride, the salesman assured me. But these were foolish reasons. The real reason was that I somehow felt I had to call my own bluff. I'd said for years that I wanted one. Here was my chance. If I flunked it, I had a feeling my life would begin to close down. I'd watched it happen to other people. The desirable job not taken because it meant a scary move to a new city, the exciting chance to go whitewater rafting passed up because the boat might overturn. And each time I'd seen the person's life grow narrower, more restricted, as though closing one door had slammed other unknown doors shut. I wrote out a check for the scooter. The next step was to apply for a learner's permit. When I handed my driver's license to the young blonde behind the desk, she checked it indifferently until she came to date of birth. Her eyes leaped to my face. A derisive smile twitched the corners of her mouth. Aren't you a little old to be joining the Hells Angels, she drawled. I couldn't have agreed more the first time I took the machine on the road. I was as nervous as a squirrel's tail. Anxiously, I kept reminding myself where the accelerator and brakes were located. A car was coming up behind me, so I veered over to the side. I was slipping on gravel. I stamped on the floor. Where was the brake? Why was I going so fast? After the car passed, I found panic had frozen my hand on the accelerator, and the brakes were not on the floor, but on the handlebar. As soon as I somehow figured out how to stop, I got off and walked the scooter back home. I tried again the next day and the one after. On the fourth day, I relaxed just enough to make a delightful discovery. I could smell the countryside, the grasses and daisies and fresh mud and wild roses, and I could see their sources. The landscape wasn't a movie unreeling rapidly, but a tapestry of stitched leaves and branches and blades and petals. That is, if I could drag my eyes from the road long enough to snatch a look. In search of a safe place to practice, I discovered a long paved lane that led to a factory. After the factory closed and on weekends, I had the road to myself to do figure-8 turns. When I grew bored with patient circling, I took off for the factory, wheeled around, and sped back. Every day I went faster, leaning into curves, dipping and swooping. And when I slowed, I laughed with joy. I had no idea that hurtling into the wind, unprotected, free, could be so exhilarating. One day, with growing confidence in my little purring machine, I ventured as far as the village, 2 miles downriver. I put the scooter up on its stand and took a bag of leftover rolls to the river's edge to feed the ducks. I was vaguely aware of 2 little boys eyeing the scooter. Suddenly, one was at my elbow. "Him and me," he said, nodding toward his companion. "We'll trade you our bikes for your scooter." I started to laugh, but his freckled face was perfectly serious. I answered gravely, "It's a handsome offer, but I'm afraid I don't have much use for 2 bikes." He nodded. He could understand that, but he didn't go away. "Where do you live?" he asked. "What's your name? How fast does the scooter go? What did it cost?" When my supply of rolls was gone, the ducks wandered off, but Brian and Lou stayed another half hour. Something felt odd as we chatted. Then I realized it was exactly that. We were chatting. They weren't shy little boys. I wasn't a remote, grown-up lady. I was the owner of a marvelous toy, and that erased the gulf between us. Neighbors seemed to feel the same thing. When I passed on my scooter, they smiled and waved and often called out, "How you doing?" At first I thought it was because I looked so funny in my white helmet, horn-rimmed bifocals, and leather gloves and jacket on the hottest days, for protection in case I got knocked down. But when I took my eyes off the road, all I saw in their faces were warmth and a sort of vicarious pleasure in my adventure. I knew I'd really been accepted, though, when a teenager roared by in his souped-up Chevy and yelled, "Go for it, lady!" His smile was broad and approving. "I did," I shouted after him. "And I'm glad," I thought 1,000 times since. The scooter has indeed taken me on unexpected paths. It's brought me new adventures. But most of all, it makes me feel that all the doors of my life are still wide open. Anything is possible. Riding it is risky, sure. I haven't changed my mind about that. On the other hand, one of the friends who was most vocal about the dangers of a scooter has fallen in the bathtub and broken her arm. Another, a widow who was going back to college until she grew afraid of being laughed at by younger students, has fallen into a deep depression. I think of them, and I wonder if the only thing more dangerous than taking a risk is not taking it. Maybe, as Garrison Keillor has remarked, you're supposed to get reckless as you grow older. That way you keep saying yes to life. And perhaps saying yes, not being safe, is the real point of life. Prettier than freckles. Wrinkles should merely indicate where smiles have been. Mark Twain. It happened one year at the zoo. My daughter and I stood beside a grandmother and a little girl whose face was sprinkled with bright red freckles. The children were waiting in line to get their cheeks painted by a local artist who was decorating them with tiger paws. "You've got so many freckles, there's no place to paint," a boy in the line cried. Embarrassed, the little girl beside me dropped her head. Her grandmother knelt down next to her. "I love your freckles," she said. "Not me," the girl replied. "Well, when I was a little girl, I always wanted freckles," she said, tracing her finger across the child's cheek. "Freckles are beautiful." The girl looked up. "Really?" "Of course," said the grandmother. "Why, just name me one thing that's prettier than freckles." The little girl peered into the old woman's smiling face. "Wrinkles," she answered softly. That moment has whispered something to me ever since. If I look at others with the eyes of love, I will not see blemishes, only beauty. The age of mystique. How old would you be if you didn't know how old you are? Leroy Satchel Paige. On my 50th birthday, my older daughter gave me a pin that said, "50 is nifty." I wore it to work that day, and what fun it was. All day, people kept saying things to me like, "Anita, you don't look 50, or, "Why, Anita, you can't be 50, and "We know you can't be 50. It was wonderful. Now, I knew they were lying, and they knew I knew, but isn't that what friends and coworkers are for? to lie to you when you need it in times of emergency, like divorce and death and turning 50. You know how it is with a lie, though. You hear it often enough, and you begin to think it's true. By the end of the day, I felt fabulous. I fairly floated home from work. In fact, on the way home, I thought, I really ought to dump my husband. After all, the geezer was 51, way too old for a young-looking gal like me. Arriving home, I had just shut the front door when the doorbell rang. It was a young girl from a florist shop bringing birthday flowers from a friend. They were lovely. I stood in my doorway holding the flowers and admiring them, and the delivery girl stood there waiting for a tip. She noticed the pin on my jacket and said, "Oh, 50, eh?" "Yes," I answered and waited. I could stand one last compliment before my birthday ended. 50, she repeated. "That's great. Birthday or anniversary?" Strikeout or home run? It ain't over till it's over. Yogi Berra. Everyone said the Yankees would lose this game. It was the fourth game of the 1996 World Series. Now the score was 6-0 with Atlanta winning. I lay in bed half awake. Forget it, I thought as I turned off the radio and fell asleep. But when I awoke, I immediately turned on the radio. It was the 8th inning now, the score 6-3, the Yankees making a comeback. But what chance did they really have? The realist in me asked. What chance did I have, I thought as I lay there in the dark. When you have had cancer, you're always fighting the statistics, always hoping for complete recovery. When you're a widow, you're always fighting against loneliness. I felt like the Yankees in the fourth game of the World Series. That night, I didn't think I had a chance either. And then the Yankees hit the home run with 2 men on base. I jumped out of bed. I ran into the kitchen and wolfed down a sandwich and had a drink. The dog thought it was time to go out and play. I let him into the backyard. The cats thought it was morning. I fed them. All the lights blinked on in the house. I was fully awake. I was shouting. I was talking aloud as if there were others in the room. "Come on, Yankees," I yelled. And then they did it in the 10th inning. They put the game away. I was laughing, running around the house and jumping on the sofa and telling the dog and the cats, "They did it! They really did it!" I had not been a baseball fan before, but I vowed I would be a Yankee fan forever because now I understood about baseball. My husband had been a passionate baseball fan. He would sit, sometimes by the radio, sometimes by the television. He would talk to the radio, talk to his favorite team. If they were doing well, he smiled. If they were doing poorly, he cursed the set, cursed the players, threw the newspaper on the floor. He never went through the game alone. There were always friends to call, back and forth a dozen times through all the innings. If it was a victory, they rejoiced together. If it was a defeat, they mourned. And of course, they went to games with hoagies and sodas packed away, enough food for a week. Fathers took sons and daughters, and mothers wondered what this excitement was all about. I was envious of my husband's baseball passion when springtime came. There was nothing outside my home and family that possessed me so fully. My husband knew baseball better than he knew me. His mother told me he had loved baseball as a boy, and the love had continued into manhood. I never understood about my husband and baseball, about his baseball cards, about his dream to attend just one spring training camp in Florida, about the pride on his face when he wore his team's baseball cap. I never understood about baseball until the Yankees won the fourth game of the 1996 World Series. The odds were against them. Nobody thought they had a chance, certainly not to come back from a 6-0 deficit. There were times when the bases were loaded against them and their pitcher threw the ball anyway. There were times when the batter was up at bat and it looked bleak, but it was his turn, and that's all there was to it. There were times when the score turned sour, and there didn't seem to be a reason to even try, but try they did. Many times I feel the bases are loaded in my life. The odds pile up against me. I just don't want to pitch that ball. It seems futile. But every day I get the opportunity to pitch the ball again. The bat's in my hand, and it's my turn up at a new day. I can hit the home run if I believe it, and sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Those Yankees didn't care about the people who didn't believe in them, and I'm sure they didn't care about the statistics. They believed in themselves, in the game, and in the unpredictability of life. I thought about it that night, why I felt so good, so energized, why I was celebrating, why that good feeling remained with me. Now I understood why my husband loved baseball. Life is just one big baseball game. That was the secret. He knew. You never can tell what the outcome is going to be until the very last inning. Perhaps tomorrow will be the day I hit my own home run. The long ride. Life is like a bicycle. You don't fall off unless you stop pedaling. Claude Pepper, U.S. Congressman. Betty Olson was just settling down to enjoy the golden years with her husband. The last of their 5 children was about to leave home. The couple had plans to travel, but then after 33 years of marriage, he sprung a little surprise on her. "I'm leaving," he announced. He had found someone else, 12 years younger. The pain rattled her entire soul and body. Life seemed over, at least the life she had known for the last 3 decades. Starting over at age 55 won't be easy, Betty said, but she decided it would do her no good to feel sorry for herself, so she got busy. She joined a speaking program, became a volunteer at the American Cancer Society, and trained as a docent at a local art museum. She played bridge and tennis, worked at the local blood bank, and got recertified as a nurse. But no matter how busy Betty kept, her heart remained cold and lonely. Nothing really captured her spirit. Then one day, 2 friends asked her to go on a bike ride. Not just any bike ride, but a metric century ride, a 64-mile journey up and down the hills of Gilroy, California. The couple didn't tell Betty, then 60, the distance of the ride. "Or I would never have gone," she laughs. Betty had poked around town on a bike before, but that was about it. The threesome hit the road together with a pack of other riders. As Betty huffed and puffed up the hill, she couldn't believe the breathtaking beauty of the countryside, the sage thickets, the velvet green colors of the brush and creek sides. Nothing compared to experiencing the wildflowers, the sweet, dank smell of woods, even people's front yards. That's when Betty became enraptured with biking. She had determined when her marriage came crashing down that she was going to find new frontiers, new worlds to explore, new dreams to dream. She exclaimed, "Life really begins at 60. The enthusiastic novice joined 2 bike clubs and started to travel everywhere by bicycle. First, she biked 100 miles in the inland passage of Alaska, where she saw bear footprints and golden eagles in flight, and watched cruise ships from a mountaintop. The next summer, she traveled to New Zealand, but these rides weren't enough for Betty. She wanted to try something more challenging, like biking 2,500 miles or so. Her first long-distance undertaking was a cross-country ride from San Diego to Jacksonville, Florida, an 80-mile-a-day, 5-week trip. Her children were terrified, and her sister told her, "Don't do that. It's too strenuous." Betty admits, "I too was uncertain I could make it." But nothing could stop Betty, and she had no regrets when she found herself amid towering pine trees and fields of bluebonnet lupines. "I had never seen anything like it in my life," she observed. In addition to the awesome sights, Betty loved stretching her limits and discovering new sources of inner strength. Invigorated, she convinced her 43-year-old son to tag along with her on some of her shorter rides, like the 50-mile Tierra Bella. Now 73 years young, Betty has completed a total of 3 cross-country trips, biked through 47 states, and visited 13 national parks. She estimates she's done a total of 70,000 miles on her bike since she started these great adventures. Betty has made dozens of biking friends, packed 40 pounds of gear in intense Sierra Club hikes, and has been asked to remarry twice. I turned both gentlemen down, she says, because they weren't into biking or hiking. Betty thinks she needs someone a bit more on the active side. Her riding spirit and intense journeys, which include a trip from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., and from the state of Washington to Maine, have captured the interest of many journalists who have written her story a half-dozen times. I find it's an exhilarating fatigue, she has said. I feel so healthy. I'm in better shape than I've ever been. It's been a cure for loneliness. I have many friends. It's not too strenuous. When you travel, you have no yard work, no shopping, no cooking, no meetings, and no housework. And I'd like to get to know more of the history of our country. Biking obviously is also helping Betty get to know herself better. This paragon of health, physical and mental, has seen sights other people never see in their lifetimes. Once when touring in Yellowstone, with all the bikers riding single file, a herd of buffalo joined them across the river, trotting single file too. In Costa Rica, she came eyeball to eyeball with a monkey swinging through the trees right toward her. One summer, she saw swarms of stunning butterflies in the Ozarks. These magnificent, life-enriching experiences are why Betty probably didn't quit bike riding even after she got shot in the Napa Valley. She was at the very end of a bike line when a teenager shot her with a pellet gun. She was hospitalized for two nights, but doctors concluded that removing the pellet was too dangerous and decided to leave it where it was. Within 2 weeks, this gallant lady, pellet intact, was back on her bike, cruising the eastern Sierras. She had learned not to let a little detour stop her from exploring her newfound world. Biking is so fulfilling, she explains. I just don't have enough time to do all I'd like to do. I'd like to get to the garden, for example, but the weeds get there faster. I really love being with my children and my family, but I think biking adds a new chapter in my life. When I rode the Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, and the Natchez Trail, I felt like the pioneers. She enthusiastically adds, I hope my newfound discoveries will rub off on the rest of my family. Who knows? Maybe some of her family members are ready to embark on new journeys in their own lives to broaden their horizons. 2 of her teenage grandsons are joining her in the Tierra Bella, and her young granddaughters were at her house the other day when they said excitedly, Grandma, let's go for a long bike ride. Betty hoisted the exuberant grandchildren, one onto a tricycle and the other onto a 2-seat banana bike. She hopped onto her 24-speed bicycle, and together they rode an entire 5 blocks before the kids were exhausted. They enjoyed the exhilaration of a short journey that may well be their first taste of what it is like to embark on life-expanding expeditions, just like Grandma.